Hey, what's going on, guys? So, I recently had to scrape a website and get some data, and it gave me the idea to do kind of an ultimate web scraping guide. So, what we're going to do is take a look at some slides and just talk about what web scraping is, why you would do it. We're going to look at the steps to take, and then we're going to jump in and we're going to scrape a e-commerce website for some books. So, we're going to get a bunch of data on these books, and we're also going to be scraping data from a site that has pagination. So we'll have to basically use our tool to go through each page, scrape all the data, go to the next page, and so on. And I'm going to do this both with Node.js and Python. So with Node.js, we're going to use a tool called Puppeteer, which is a web scraping library. It allows us to use basically have a headless browser within our code. And then for Python, we're going to use a library called Beautiful Soup. And we're basically going to do the same thing. So if you want, you can watch both and you can kind of compare and contrast. Or if you're just interested in the JavaScript, you can watch that part. If you're just interested in the Python, you can watch that part. All right, but ultimately, this is going to give you a really good understanding as to what web scraping is, why you would use it, and also how to do it. This web scraping guide is sponsored by Bright Data. Their ScrapeOps solution allows companies to scale up their web scraping and data collection. With their global proxy network, browser automation tools, and web scraping APIs, you can scrape data from any public website. Bright Data's tools offer universal compatibility with just about every programming language and web scraping tool. You can run your Puppeteer, Selenium, and Playwright scripts on full hosted browsers with unlimited scalability. You also get 24/7 support anytime, anywhere. So if you like this guide and you want to take your web scraping projects to the next level, click the link in the description and visit brightdata.com. Okay, so we're going to look at some slides, talk a little bit about web scraping, why we do it, how we do it, and then we're going to jump in and I'm going to show you how we can scrape a website using both Node.js with Puppeteer and Python and Beautiful Soup. All right, so what is web scraping? As I mentioned, web scraping is the process of extracting data from websites. This can be done manually, but it's often more efficient to use a program to automate this process. And web scraping is commonly used to collect data for research, for analysis, and for other purposes. So, for example, you may want to collect data on a job board or collect product information from an e-commerce website. And web scraping allows you to automate that process of collecting this data so you can save time and effort. Now, obviously, APIs are one of the best ways to get data from a website, but not all websites have APIs, so web scraping can be a good alternative. However, that brings me to my next point, which is the legal and ethical considerations. And this is something that's really important to understand when you're getting into web scraping. It can kind of be a controversial topic because some websites don't allow scraping at all of their content. They usually list this in their policies. Some do allow it, just full on whatever, you scrape as much as you want, and some have certain stipulations. So it's important to be aware of the legal and ethical considerations when you're scraping websites and to make sure you have permission to scrape those sites that you're targeting. And in this guide, we're going to be scraping a site called books.toscrape.com. So it's actually created to scrape for educational purposes. Now, as far as the history of web scraping, it's been around for a long time. The very first tool that was used, I guess you could put web scraping in quotes here, it was created in 1993, and that was the World Wide Web Wanderer, which was a bot that would go from link to link and index the content of pages that it visited. And although it wasn't a scraper in the traditional sense, it laid the groundwork for automated web data collection and search engine crawling. So it was kind of the origins of search engines. And then in 2004, the first traditional web scraper, as far as I know, was Beautiful Soup. And that's a Python library that's still used to this day, and we're going to use in this video, and allows developers to extract data from HTML and XML files. And since then, web scraping has become a common practice for collecting data from the web. And they've gained even more popularity recently due to the increasing amount of data that's available on the web. Now, web scraping has a lot of different uses, so these are just some of the more common ones. So first we have data collection. So obviously, collecting data from websites for research or analysis. This could be data on products, jobs, real estate properties, news articles, and the list just goes on and on. Price monitoring, so monitoring prices on e-commerce websites to track changes in prices over time. You could do this just for yourself to find the best deals, or for a business to track competitors' pricing. Content aggregation, so you can aggregate content from multiple websites to create a new website service. You can build a news aggregator that collects news articles from multiple sources and display them on a single website. Lead generation, so collecting contact information from websites for sales or marketing purposes, and just keep in mind, ethical and legal considerations when you're doing stuff like that. And then market research, so collecting data on competitors or industry trends from websites. And then social media marketing, or social media monitoring, to collect data from social media websites to track trends or sentiment. Now, I'm just going to give you a quick summary of how web scraping works, and then we'll go a bit deeper into the steps, and then ultimately I'll show you how to do it with code. So web scraping works usually by sending a request to a website, downloading the HTML content of the page, and then extracting the data that you're interested in. And you would obviously do this through code. And there's a few ways to extract data from a web page depending on the structure of the page and the type of data that you're looking for. Some common methods include using regular expressions, parsing the HTML content with a library like Beautiful Soup, or using a tool like Puppeteer to interact with the page in what we call a headless browser. And these are powerful because we can interact with the page as if we were a user in a browser. So we can do things like click buttons, fill out forms, and we can extract data from the page. And many tools that are used for web scraping are also used for just testing in general. And they allow you to automate tasks in a headless browser. And you can do what you want with that data, such as save it in a file or save it in a database. Now, as far as the tools and libraries that we can use for web scraping, this is just a few of them, and these are mostly just JavaScript and Python, but you can do web scraping in other languages as well. So first we have Puppeteer, which is a Node.js library that provides a high-level API to control a headless Chrome or Chromium over the DevTools protocol, and it's a powerful tool for automating tasks in a headless browser. Like I said, clicking buttons, filling out forms, things like that, and of course extracting data. We also have Cheerio for JavaScript, which is a fast and flexible, lean implementation of core jQuery, but it's designed specifically for the server, for Node.js. So it's a popular tool for web scraping in Node. Beautiful Soup is one of the most popular libraries for web scraping in general. This is a Python library for parsing HTML and XML documents. It provides a simple API for navigating and searching the HTML content of a web page, making it easy to extract data from web pages. We also have Scrappy, which is another Python framework for web scraping, and that also provides an API for extracting data, handling pagination, following links, things like that. And then Selenium is a popular tool for automating web browsers, and it provides a WebDriver API that allows you to interact with a web page in a headless browser. Now, Selenium is often used for testing web applications, but it can also be used for web scraping. Okay, so now let's go through the main steps to web scraping. And these are kind of the general have-to steps. And then after this, I'm going to go over some other steps that you may have to apply depending on the site that you're scraping. So of course, the first thing you're going to do is identify the website, and you want to make sure you have permission to scrape that website. And scraping without permission can be illegal. And as I mentioned, there's legal and ethical considerations when it comes to web scraping, so just be sure that you're aware of all the rules and regulations that surround that in your country and for that specific website. So you want to inspect the page. Once you've identified the website, you want to inspect and determine the structure of the page and the data that you want to extract. You can do this by right-clicking on the page and selecting Inspect in your browser, or use a tool like the browser DevTools. And you want to examine the HTML structure of the page to identify the data you're interested in. And this includes looking at things like class names, IDs, and other attributes of the elements on the page. Okay, once you do that, once you've identified the data and you've checked out the structure, You then want to write your code to extract that data. You want to, it'll have to make a request to the website, download the HTML content, extract the data, and this usually works similar to how you would select elements within JavaScript or jQuery. In fact, Cheerio is actually a subset of jQuery, so it's very, very similar. And you may have to handle things like pagination, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide, and we will be doing that in our code as well. And then once you write your code, you want to obviously run it and scrape the website, extract the data that you're interested in, and then you can save that data to a file, to a JSON file, CSV file, or you could save it to a database. I mean, there's different things that you can do with that data. Now, these are some additional steps and considerations that you may or may not have to deal with. So first, you want to handle any pagination. If the data that you want to scrape is spread across multiple pages, then you'll need to handle that. You can do this by following the links that are on the next page. So, you have pagination, you can click on next, see the next whatever 10 or 20 listings, get that data, click the link, get the next 10 or 20, however many is on that page, and specify how many pages you actually want to scrape. And we're going to be doing that within our scripts. You want to handle any dynamic content. So if the website uses JavaScript to load the content dynamically, you might need to use a tool like Puppeteer to interact with the page in a headless browser. Handle errors. So web scraping can be error prone, so you'll need to handle any errors that you have in your code to ensure that your scraper runs smoothly. Respecting robots.txt. So many websites have this robots.txt file that specifies which pages can be crawled and scraped and which pages can't. And these are typically used to tell search engines whether to crawl that page or not. So just make sure you respect whatever links are in that or pages are in that robots file. And then rate limiting. So to avoid overloading the website you're scraping, you should add a rate limiter to your scraper so that you're not sending tons and tons of requests and overloading the website. But that's pretty much it as far as just describing the general aspects of web scraping. So now let's jump into some code. We're going to start off with Node.js and Puppeteer, and then we'll look at Python and Beautiful Soup. Okay, so now that we've talked about web scraping, let's get into it. We're going to start off with Node.js and Puppeteer, and then we'll move on to Python and Beautiful Soup. So this is the website we're going to scrape. It's books.toscrape.com, and as you can see, it's meant to be scraped, so no legal or ethical issues here. And that's something you always want to look into before you scrape any website for any data. So it's set up just like a regular e-commerce website. We have a bunch of books here for the products. It has an image, a rating, title, price, in stock, add to basket button. And I believe there's 20 on the first page, and then there's 50 pages. So pagination is something we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have to go to the second page, or however many pages we want, and get the data from each page. And as you can see in the URL, it goes to /catalog/page - whatever the page number. So that's something we have to use and take into account in our script. Now, as far as the data that I just want to get basically everything here but the image. I want the title, the rating, which is in the form of stars, and then the price, and if it's in stock. So we know what we want to scrape. We want to get the books. I'm going to save it to a JSON file. And we know the fields that we want, the data. So next step is to look at the structure. And we can do that, of course, by right-clicking and inspect. And then I'm going to click this icon here and just select the first item. And you can see that every book, every item here is wrapped in a LI tag. And in that is an article tag with a class of product_POD. Okay, so they all have that article with that class. So that's something to take note of, because that's the class we're going to basically use to grab onto each product. And in that, we have an image container, which I'm not interested in. I don't care about the image. The rating, you can see it has a class of star rating with a bunch of icons, but it also has a class of whatever that rating is, in this case, 3. If I were to look at this one here, you can see that this div, or paragraph rather, has a class of 1 because it's a 1-star rating. Okay, so we get the rating, and then in the H3 is a link that has a title attribute, so that's how we can get the title. And then for the price, there's a product price div, and then in that is a price color class on this paragraph. That's where the actual price is. And then there's also a class for if it's in stock or not. So that's the structure that we need to pay attention to, and I'm just going to kind of keep this open while we write our script. All right, so like I said, we're going to start with Node.js. So if you have no interest in Node and Puppeteer, you can skip, move on to the Python part. But I'm going to open up my terminal, and first thing I'm going to do is just create a new directory for this. I'm going to call it web-scraper-node, and then cd into web scraper node, and then I'm just going to open up VS Code or open up whatever text editor or IDE that you want to use. So from here, I'll open up my integrated terminal. And since we're using Node, we're going to npm init a package.json. I'm going to use the -y flag to skip any questions. And I'm assuming that you guys have basic JavaScript knowledge and a little bit of Node.js knowledge. And for Puppeteer, we can install that with npm. So let's do that. Obviously, you need to have Node installed on your computer to use npm. Okay, so that will set that up. Package.json, you can see now we have Puppeteer installed. All right, so one other thing I want to do, I want to use the ES module syntax, the import syntax. So to do that in Node, we need to go to our package.json, and we need to add in here type, and I'm going to set that to module. If you want to use CommonJS and the require syntax, then you don't need to do this, but I prefer to use import. So now I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it scrape.js. You can call it whatever you'd like. And then first thing I'm going to do is import Puppeteer from Puppeteer. And then all the methods we use from Puppeteer are asynchronous. So I'm going to create an async function called scrape. You can use an iffy if you don't want to use a named function. Okay, and then underneath that, I want to make sure that I call it before I forget. And then I'm just going to kind of go step by step. Now, Puppeteer has what's called a headless browser. So you can think of it as like Chrome or Firefox or whatever without the Chromium, without the UI. You basically do it from within your code. So we want to launch that browser. And I'm going to put the object that we get into a variable called browser. So we're going to set that to Puppeteer, and then there's a method called launch. All right, now I want to basically create a new page to work in. So we're going to say const page and set that to, I'm sorry, this needs to be await because these are all asynchronous. So then we want to await on that browser object. We have a method called new page. Okay, so now we have this page to work with, and we need to go to a specific URL. So let's put the URL in a variable. So const URL, and we're going to set that to HTTPS, and it's going to be books.toscrape.com. And then I'm going to await, and on that page object, there's a method called goto, and we're going to pass that URL into it. Okay, and then basically we can just select whatever we want from the page. Now, just to give you an example, I'm just going to get the title. So let's say const title, and then we can await on page, and then there's a method called title. And then let's just do a console log, and I'll just put backticks here and just say page title, and we'll put in the title. And then the last thing we need to do after everything is close the browser. So we want to say await on browser.close. So now let's run this. So I'm going to come down here and run node scrape because I called the file scrape.js. And it should make the request. And there we go. We get the page title, which is all products, and books to scrape sandbox. So we know that we're able to make the request. We're able to get the website. We create this page, and we get the title. Now, I don't care about the title. I just wanted to use that as an example. So let's get rid of this. And Puppeteer gives us a method called evaluate that allows us to run JavaScript in the context of the page, and we can then select data using just like query selector and query selector all. So what we're going to do is create a variable called books, and I want to set that to await page.evaluate, and that evaluate is going to take in a function. I'm just going to pass in an arrow function here, and we want to get the element that surrounds the data that we want to select. And again, if we go back to the structure here, we have an article that has the class of product underscore POD. So within that is all the things we want. So we'll use that as our selector. All right, so let's go back into evaluate, and then from here we'll go ahead and create a variable called book elements, and we're going to set that to document dot, and then we're going to use query selector all, because obviously there's more than one book element. And the selector we're going to use is the class of that article. So product underscore, what was it, POD? Okay, so that will give us our elements. Now, I'd like to show you what that gives us, but we can't console log within the page.evaluate, because you can think of this as like a virtual page. But what we can do is return from this book elements, and then outside of the evaluate, we can then console log books, okay? Because we have books, that's set to the evaluate. From the evaluate, we're returning book elements, and then we're logging books. So let's save that, and then let's run this node scrape. And what we get back is what's called a node list, which is an array-like structure. And you'll see that we have 0 through 19. That's because there's 20 pages on the first, 20 books on the first page, and we're only dealing with the first page, which is this URL. Now, the reason that it's giving us an empty object is because we haven't specified any data that we want to extract yet. So it's just giving us an empty object. So what I want to do is, instead of returning book elements directly, let's convert it to an array by using array.from, and in that we're going to pass in our book elements, and then let's use map. So we're going to loop through each book. Okay, so we'll say for each book, then I just want to return book, and then we're going to run this again, node scrape. And now we get an actual array of empty objects, because I still haven't selected I haven't extracted any data yet. So the first piece of data that I want to get is going to be the title. So let's get rid of this return here, and then let's say const title. And then this is where the structure comes into play. You have to know what you're selecting. So we're already in the article with this class of product pod, and we want the H3, and in that is a link, and that link has a title attribute. So why don't we use that? And we're just using, regular JavaScript code here. So I'm going to say book dot and then query selector, and I want to select the H3 and then the link inside the H3, and then I want to get the attribute of title. Okay, and then what I'm going to do next is just return title. So now let's run web scrape again and see what that gives us, and you can see it gives me an array of titles. So we've actually extracted all the titles on the page. Of course, it's only the first page. So in addition to the title, I want the price. So let's get rid of that return. Let's say const price, and for the price we'll say book dot query selector, and we have that class, I think it's price color. So if we look right here, we do have a product price div, but in that is 2 paragraphs, and then a paragraph with the class of price color. So let's go back into the query selector, and let's select the class of price underscore color, and then we want the text content within that. And then let's just return price, and what we should get if we run this now is an array of prices. And there we go. So we're able to get the title, we're able to get the price. Let's get the stock. And remember, there's a class of in stock and availability. So we can just check for those classes. So let's say stock, and let's say book dot query selector, and I want to select the class of in stock and availability. Okay, and then I just want to return some text that says in stock if it is and out of stock if it's not. So what we'll do is just add on a ternary here and say in stock, else then we'll say out of stock. All right, and then let's just do a return of stock, and then we should get an array, and you can see that they're all in stock. And then the last thing I want to get is the rating. And remember, the rating actually has a class of, let's take a look again here. So rating has a star rating class, but then it also has whatever it is, 1 through 5, it'll have that as a class name. So what we can do is just simply take the class, split it into an array where this is 0 and this is 1 as far as the index, and we'll get the 1 index. So let's go and say const, and we'll call this rating, set that to book.query selector, and we want to select the class of star dash rating. Okay, they all have that. And then get the class name. So class name, and then I'm going to use split, and I want to split by this, just a space, because there's a space in between both classes, and I want the second class, which will be the 1 index. Right, so if I do a console log of rating, and then we run node scrape, I'm sorry, we need to return it, not log it. Return rating. There we go. So now we have just all the ratings. So all we have to do now is return all of that stuff, not just one, which is what I've been doing. So let's return an object, and in that object we'll have the title, we'll have the price, the stock, the rating. Oh, you know what? Let's get the link as well. So up here, let's say const link, and set that to book.query selector, and we just want to get the, so it's the h3 has a link in it, so we want the a tag, and then I want to get the href attribute. So we'll say get attribute, and we want the href. Okay, so that should give us the link. So now down here, let's just add in link. And then we'll console log that. Let's run node scrape. And there we go. So we'll make this a little bigger, and you can see now we have just a bunch of objects that has all the data for the books. So we've successfully scraped the home page. So now what I want to do is save that data into a JSON file. You could save it into a database, whatever you want to do with it. So let's import the FS module from FS. So this is just the Node.js file system module. And we're going to go down to the bottom where we have the console log. And if you want to still console log it, you can. I'm not, but I am just going to console log and say data saved to, and we'll call it books.json. And then right above that, we're going to use the FS module. And to keep this simple, I'm just going to use the synchronous version because we don't really need the asynchronous. And this takes in a file name, so it's going to be books.json. And then I do want to just run it through the JSON stringify method, because the second argument is what we want to put in that file. So let's say json.stringify, and we're going to pass in books, that's the data. Then we're going to pass in null for the replacer and 2 for the space parameter, so if it formats nicely. And we'll save that. Let's come down here and let's run the file. So node scrape. We see data saved to books.json. If we look over here, it created a books.json file, and in that is an array with all the data. So we could use this for whatever we want. If we wanted to, use it for an API for our own service, our own website, we could do that. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. That's how you use Puppeteer. Now, at the moment, we're only getting the data from this URL, which is page 1. Now, what if we want more than that? What if we want all the data, or we want the first 5, 10 pages, whatever? So now I'm going to show you how we can handle pagination. So first thing, let's go right under where we create the page variable, and we're going to add a couple variables here. So the first is going to be called all books, which is going to be set to an empty array, and at the end of this, will be what we actually save to our JSON file. And then we're going to use let here, and we want the current page, which is going to start at 1. And you could start at 5 or 10. It doesn't really matter. It depends on the data you're looking for. But we're going to start at 1, and I'm using let because this will be reassigned. It'll be incremented. And then let's also add max pages, which is the number of pages we want to scrape. In this case, I'm going to say 10. I think there's 50 total, but the more pages, the more data, the longer it takes. Now, the URL, we have to change this because, again, this is only the first 20 books. So I'm actually going to change these quotes to backticks so we can have a dynamic value in here. And we want to change it to, if we go to the website here, yeah, so I'm on page 2 right now. So let's just copy that or type it out, whatever. And I'm going to put that in here, except I'm going to change the 2 to the dynamic value of the current page. All right, now we need to loop over the pages and do this stuff down here. So let's go right above the URL, and I'm going to use a while loop, and I'm going to say while the current page is less than or equal to the max pages. Okay, so if there's any pages left, then we're going to keep on iterating. And what we're going to want to put in here is basically everything except for where we save the file. So let's grab, so basically where this evaluate ends, which is right here. So I'm going to take that and all this stuff, cut it, and then put that into the while loop. All right, now let's go still within the while loop. So let's see, the while loop ends right here. I'm going to go still within that, and we're going to then take our all books array and we're going to push onto that. I want to push the books but keep the ones that are there as well. So let's use the spread operator and books. Okay, so every time we iterate through a page, we're going to add the books. And I'll even do a console log where we say, let's put some backticks, and we'll say books on page, and then whatever the current page. And then we'll put a colon right here, and then just a comma, and then books. So basically it'll say books on page 2, and then it'll show an array of the books on page 2. You don't have to do this, but it's just to know what's going on. And then we'll just take the current page and increment it. So we'll just add 1 to it. And the last thing is down here where we save our data. Instead of just books, we're going to be saving all books. And that should do it. So I'm going to save, and let's go ahead and run node scrape. I'm just going to make this a little bigger so we can see what was actually logged. All right, so you can see it's logging all the objects, and we get books. This is the last one, books on page 10, and then it gives us that array. And let's see, we should have right here books on page 9. So it's logging it all. Now let's check and see if it was actually written to the file. And if we take a look here, we have a lot more than just 20. So yeah, so we have 10 pages worth of data. And if you wanted to, you could get all 50 pages. But yeah, so that's how we can not only scrape data from a page, but also use pagination. We're using our headless browser to basically, click on the link and go to the next page, get the data, next page, etc. And that's it. So that's scraping with Node and Puppeteer. So now we're going to get into using Python with Beautiful Soup. So now we're going to scrape this website using Python and Beautiful Soup. So if you watch the Node and Puppeteer version, then this is very similar. It's just using different syntax. Obviously, it's a different language. It's a different framework. But the idea is pretty much the same. So let's create a new directory to work in. I'm going to call this Web Scraper -Python. And then I'm going to cd into Web Scraper -Python. And then from here, I'm just going to open up Visual Studio Code and open up my integrated terminal. Now, the very first thing I want to do is create a virtual environment because we're installing packages. I don't want to install them globally. And I'm assuming you have basic knowledge of Python. If you don't, you can check out my Python crash course. So let's say Python 3-m venv, and I'm going to call my environment env. Okay, so that will create the environment. Now we have to activate it. So let's say source and then env/bin/activate. Okay, so that's activated. You can see we have env in parentheses here. Now I'm going to install packages with pip. So the two packages I want to install are going to be requests, so I can make HTTP requests in my code, and then also Beautiful Soup. Beautiful Soup 4 is the package name. Did I spell that right? B-A-U. Yeah. Okay, so now we have those installed. So let's now create a file, and I'll call this scrape.py, and then I'll open up scrape.py. And the first thing I'm going to do is import what we need. So we need requests, and then we also want to import from BS4. We want to import Beautiful Soup, and then also we need the JSON package. So let's import that. All right, now I'm going to define my main function, which is going to be my the entry point to our application. And then before I do anything there, I'm going to run it. So we'll say if _name equals _main, then we're going to run main. Okay, and all I'm going to do in main right now is call another function that I'm going to create called fetch books, and we're going to pass in the page number, which will pass in a 1. And then right above that, let's define fetch _books, and that's going to take in page number. And for now, I'm just going to print the page number and make sure everything's working so far. So then down here, let's run Python 3 scrape, and we get 1. Good. So let's get rid of that print. I want to define a couple variables. First is going to be the URL. Now in the Node Puppeteer version, I just scraped the first page first, and then we added the pagination. I'm just going to include the pagination right from the start here, which means that for our URL, we need to use this, which has the /catalog and then the page number. So I'm going to just grab that, and then I'm going to use an F string here, so F and then some quotes, and pass that in. And instead of a 2, that's going to be dynamic, and that's going to be our page number. Okay, so that's our URL variable. Now we need to make the request. I'm going to put the response in a variable, and we can make the requests with requests.get. We're making a get request to the URL. Okay, so that will get the response, and then we want to have a Beautiful Soup object. Let's call this soup. Set that to Beautiful Soup, and we pass in that response.text, and then as a second argument, we're going to pass in html.parser. And then just to see what that gives us, let's go ahead and print soup. Actually, we'll add on to that prettify. So let's run that. So you can see what it gives me is the entire thing, all the HTML. So now we need to specify the data that we want to extract, just like we did if you watched the Node and Puppeteer version. So let's get rid of that print, and I'm going to create an empty array or an empty list to start with, and then also a variable called book elements. And from here, on that Beautiful Soup object, there's a find all or find _all method. And that's going to take in basically the wrapper of the content we want, which in this case is going to be this article tag with the class of product prod, because that wraps around each one of these. So let's add in here, we want the article tag, and then as far as the attributes, we want class. It's actually going to be class _equals, and then product _pod. Now we can use this book elements to basically select what we want from it. So I'm just going to close that up, and let's do a for loop here. So I'm going to say for book in book elements, and then we can select what we want. And it's going to be the same stuff that we did with the Node version: the title, the price, stock, rating, and link. So let's do the title first. So we can have on that book, there's a find method, and we can find the H3. And just to kind of look at the structure again, so the title is going to be in the article. This is right, product prod, and then the H3, and inside that is an A tag with a title attribute. That's where we want to, that's how we want to get this title. So we'll find the H3, and then from that we can find again and find the A tag, and we want the title attribute. So this is the syntax we use. All right, and then let's just do a print of title, and we'll run that, and you can see now we have all the titles. Okay, next thing I want is the price. So let's say price, let's do book.find, and it's in a paragraph with the class of price color. So as a second argument, we're going to pass in here class underscore equals, and we want price underscore color. And we want the text inside, so .text, which is just like text content in JavaScript. And to check that out, we can do print price, run the file, and there we go. We have all the prices. Next is the stock. So for the stock, I want it to just say in stock if it is, or out of stock if it's not there. So let's do this. Let's say in stock if. So in stock if in stock, in stock if in stock in book.find, and we want to find the paragraph with the class. Make sure you put an underscore. So class, and that has what is it again? So in stock and availability are the classes. So in stock and availability. All right, is that formatted right? No, I have an extra quote here. Okay, so in stock, availability, and then we want the text within it. Else, then we want to have out of stock. I think that should do it. And let's check that out. So I'm going to just print stock, and I believe that they're all in stock. Yep, so we just see a bunch of in stocks. And then we want the rating. So let's say rating, and we want to find, so book find, and it's in paragraph. So paragraph, and then we want the class underscore equals, and it's star dash rating. Now, in addition to the star rating class is the actual rating as a class. So you can see this one has 1. So we can basically make this a list and select the second item, which would be the 1 index. So let's say star rating, and then in brackets, we'll say class, and we want the second one, which would be the 1 index. So now let's do a print of rating, and we should get all the ratings. There we go. And then the last thing that we want to extract is the link. So let's say book.find, and that's in the H3. We want to find again and find the A tag, and we want the href attribute. So let's print link. Let's run that, and there we go. So it only has like the actual route. It doesn't have, toscrape or books.toscrape.com/catalog. So actually, do we need catalog? Let me just see what the actual link is. If I click on, oh, here we go. Yeah, so it's /catalog. So it's only giving us this. So why don't we prefix it with this? All right, so let's come back here and let's see. We'll do, how do I want to do this? You know what? We'll leave that as is, but then when we append the object, we'll add that beginning part. So let's do this. Let's say books.append, and we're going to pass in here an object or a dictionary. So title, set that to title, and then we have what? Price. Set that to price. Then we have stock and rating. And we have link. So what I'm going to do is set this to an F string, and I'm going to paste in what I copied, and then we can just say slash and then in curly braces link. Okay, so that will create an array for us, and then let's return books. All right, and we want that return on the same level as the for, which is right there. All right, cool. So, well, you know what, before we return it, why don't we just print, because I want to make sure that everything is correct before we, do the pagination and also save it to a file. Yeah, so that looks good. And that's the first page. So you can see the last book is It's Only the Himalayas. So if we go to, what's this, page 2, let's go to page 1. And the last book is It's Only in the Himalayas. And the way we have it right now, if we pass in 2 here, we should get the second page. So I run that. The last book is You Can't Bury Them All. So let's go to the second page. And the last book, You Can't Bury Them All. So we know that this is, up to this point, is working perfectly. So again, we do want to return books from here. And then we're going to move down to our main function. So before we do anything here, let's define, I'm going to have an array of all books, or a list of all books, and then our max pages. Again, if you watch the Node version, this is pretty much the exact same thing. So now we want to loop over the pages. So let's say for current underscore page in, and we're going to use range here. We want to range 1, and then max underscore pages plus 1. And then within here, let's create a variable called books on page, and we're going to set that, and this is where we're going to use our fetch books. So we can get rid of it from there, and let's say fetch books, and then pass in whatever that current page is. And then we're going to take our all books array or list, and let's extend. So we're going to call extend, and then we're going to add books on page. So we're just going through each page and then adding those books to the array. And then I'm just going to print, just like we did in the Node version. If you watch that, I'm going to say books on page, and then the current page, and we'll put a colon, and then the books on page. So that'll just print it as it goes through each page. Then we want to save the data. So let's go on the same level as the for. Let's say save data to file. So we're going to say with, and say with open. And with is used to just wrap the execution of a block of code, and it just makes sure that resources are properly managed. It guarantees that the file is properly closed and stuff like that. So we're going to say with and then open. So open is a built-in Python function to open a file, and the file that I want to open, and it will create, if it's not there, is books.json, and we want it in write mode, so pass in W, and I'm going to say as F. So basically I'm assigning that to a variable of F. Then we're going to use the JSON package and a method called dump, which does just that, dumps the JSON into the file. And the data we want to dump is all books. And F is the name of the file. Okay, so basically the books.json. And then I'm going to set the indent to 2. And that should do it. I believe that's all we need to do. We should do some kind of console log after it's done. So down here, let's just do a print, and we'll just say data is saved to books.json. All right, so here we go, moment of truth. Let's go ahead and run it. And it's going through and just showing all the books for each page. We could make it prettier, but it doesn't really matter in the console. What matters is the file here. And there we go. So we got what should be 10 pages of data, 10 pages of books. All right, cool. So that's going to do it, guys. That's how we can scrape a website and handle pagination using both Node.js and Python. So I'll have all the code, I'll have both versions in the description if you want that. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something.